There are moments when even the smallest among us show extraordinary strength. A 9-year-old boy, burdened with responsibilities far beyond his years, made the desperate choice to flee his home with his baby sister in his arms. What led him to this moment was a life of fear, uncertainty, and a deep need to protect the one person who depended on him. When he knocked on a neighbor's door, crying and exhausted, he was making a plea for help, one that would change both of their lives forever. On a quiet evening, a neighbor was startled by frantic knocking at their door. At first, they hesitated, unsure who could be visiting so late. But as the knocking continued, growing more desperate with each second, they rushed to open it. Standing before them was a young boy, clutching his baby sister tightly to his chest, tears streaking his face. His small body trembled, and his breathing was ragged, as if he had been running for miles. His sister, barely a toddler, nestled against him with wide, tired eyes, sensing his distress but too young to understand why they had left home. The neighbor immediately ushered them inside, wrapping the boy in a warm blanket and offering him water. But he was too overwhelmed to speak at first. He held on to his sister even tighter, as if afraid someone would take her away. The neighbor could see the fear in his eyes, a fear no child should ever have to endure. He was clearly not just lost, he was running from something. It was only after several moments of reassurance that the boy, still shaking, finally found the strength to speak. His words came out in broken sobs, but the message was clear: he could not go back home. As the boy continued to cry, the neighbor's heart ached. There was no mistaking it, this child had been through something unbearable. They gently asked if he was hurt, but he shook his head. No, it wasn't him he was worried about. It was his sister. He had run away because he could no longer watch her suffer. He had risked everything to get her somewhere safe. As the boy slowly regained his composure, he began to reveal the painful reality of his life at home. He spoke in hushed tones, as if saying it aloud would somehow bring back the danger he had fled from. He explained that home wasn't a place of love or comfort, it was a place of fear. It was filled with shouting, broken promises, and the feeling of never being safe. Some nights, there was no food. Some days, he and his sister would sit in silence, too afraid to move, too afraid to cry. He had endured the pain for as long as he could, telling himself that things might change. Maybe one day, the yelling would stop. Maybe one day, there would be dinner on the table. Maybe one day, his sister wouldn't go to sleep hungry. But deep down, he knew that day would never come. He had seen too much to believe in empty hopes. And when he looked at his little sister, he knew she deserved better. She deserved to be held by loving arms, to sleep in a bed that felt safe, to wake up without fear. It wasn't a decision he had made overnight. He had thought about it for months, but there had always been something holding him back. Where would they go? What if they got caught? What if no one helped them? But then, there came a night where he realized he couldn't wait any longer. His sister had cried herself to sleep again, weak from hunger. And in that moment, he made up his mind. He was taking her away, no matter what it cost him. That night, when the house had finally fallen into silence, he made his move. He packed a small bag, just a bottle of water, a worn-out toy for his sister, and a blanket. There wasn't much to take, but he wasn't thinking about material things. All that mattered was getting her somewhere safe. Carefully, he picked her up, whispering soothing words as he carried her out the door. He didn't have a clear plan, only one destination in mind: the neighbor's house. He had seen them before, always kind, always smiling. He didn't know if they would help, but they were his best hope. The streets were dark, and the air was cold, but he didn't stop. Every step was a battle against exhaustion, but he pushed forward, determined not to let his sister feel another night of suffering. He had no shoes, his feet aching against the pavement, but the pain didn't matter. What mattered was getting away. When he finally reached the neighbor's doorstep, his legs gave out, and he nearly collapsed. He knocked as hard as he could, ignoring the fear that crept into his mind. Would they turn him away? Would they send him back? He didn't know. But he had to try. When the door opened, and he saw a familiar, kind face, he finally let go of the breath he had been holding. He had made it. They were safe, for now. The neighbor didn't hesitate. They wrapped the boy in warmth and reassurance, telling him he wasn't alone. But deep inside, they knew this was just the beginning. A child running away wasn't something to ignore. Something had to be done. They couldn't send him back to a place he feared so much. And they wouldn't. As the night went on, the neighbor made calls to the authorities, explaining the situation in as much detail as they could. The boy's eyes widened in fear when he heard the words police and social worker. He had spent so long avoiding them, afraid that they would take his sister away. But the neighbor reassured him that they weren't here to hurt them. They were here to help. When the officers arrived, they knelt down to his level, speaking to him with kindness. They didn't treat him like a problem, but like the brave child he was. "You did the right thing," one officer told him gently. "You're not alone anymore." And for the first time, the boy allowed himself to believe it. As the authorities began their investigation, the full extent of the children's suffering was revealed. Their home was not just unsafe, it was a place of pure neglect. The floors were covered in dirt, old food rotted in the corners, and the air smelled of things no child should ever have to endure. The officers who entered the house were shaken by what they found. There was no food in the fridge, no clean clothes, and no signs of warmth or care. The children's beds were nothing more than piles of thin, dirty blankets on the floor. It was a place where survival was a daily battle. The boy's parents had long since abandoned their roles as caregivers. They were caught in a cycle of addiction, more focused on their next fix than the well-being of their own children. Days would pass without them acknowledging their kids, except to yell or demand silence. The little girl had learned to cry softly because she knew loud cries led to trouble. The boy had become her protector, taking on responsibilities far beyond his years, feeding her when he could, holding her when she was scared, shielding her from the worst of their parents' anger. But he was just a child himself, and the weight of it all had become too much to bear. When social workers sat down with the boy, they asked him questions he had been too afraid to answer before. What had life been like in that house? Had anyone ever hurt them? Had he ever been afraid to sleep at night? At first, he hesitated, glancing at his sister as if to make sure she was okay. But then, slowly, he opened up. He told them everything. The missed meals, the endless nights of crying, the moments when he wasn't sure if his parents would even come home. And worst of all, the fear that one day, no one would come to save them. The truth was painful, but it was also necessary. For the first time, adults were listening, really listening. And instead of brushing it aside, instead of telling him to be strong or wait for things to get better, they took action. They reassured him that he had done the right thing, that running away had been the bravest choice he could have made. He had saved his sister's life. And now, others would step in to protect them both. For the first time in years, the boy and his sister slept in real beds, covered in warm blankets that smelled fresh and clean. They ate meals that filled their stomachs, not just scraps of food that barely kept them going. And most importantly, they were surrounded by people who cared, people who didn't yell, who didn't ignore them, who didn't make them feel like burdens. It felt unreal at first, as if it were all a dream that would vanish in the morning. But each day that passed reassured them that this was real. They were safe. The foster family that took them in had been waiting for children to love. They had always wanted to provide a home to kids who needed it most, and when they heard about the young boy who had risked everything to protect his sister, they knew they had to step up. They weren't just offering a house, they were offering a family. At first, the boy struggled to accept it. He had spent so long being the protector that he didn't know how to let someone else take care of him. He still flinched when someone raised their voice, even if it wasn't in anger. He still woke up in the middle of the night, afraid that this safe haven would disappear. But slowly, things changed. His sister laughed more, playing with toys she had never had before. She no longer clung to him in fear, but instead ran freely through the house, finally able to be a child. And for the first time in years, the boy felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. He started school, something he had barely attended before. His foster parents helped him with his homework, celebrated his small victories, and encouraged him every step of the way. They didn't just give him a roof over his head, they gave him a future. Therapy helped him unpack the pain of his past, teaching him that he wasn't responsible for what had happened, that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore. And one day, as he watched his sister run across the yard, giggling with joy, he realized something: he had done it. He had saved her. He had given her a chance at a better life. And now, for the first time, he had a chance at one too. The story of this brave 9-year-old boy and his baby sister is a reminder that even the smallest among us can show great strength and courage. Their journey from fear to safety, from heartbreak to healing, shows that no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always hope for a brighter future. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to support more inspiring stories like this.